Against the North Atlantic in December 1900, a lighthouse stood dark. Its keepers were gone, its beam extinguished. When the relief ship arrived, no response came from the shore. No movement, no signal, only the endless sound of wind against stone. The table inside was set for 3. The clock had stopped, the beds were unmade, and the men, James Duckett, Thomas Marshall, and William MacArthur, had vanished without a trace. Their disappearance became one of the most chilling mysteries in maritime history. An event so ordinary in its record, yet so precise in its silence, that every theory collapses under its own reason. What happened on that island would haunt every investigation that followed, not because of what was found, but because of what never was. If this story unsettled you, like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to The Fiery Night for more true stories buried in the dark corners of history. A black expanse of winter water, broken only by the wind, was the sea around the Flannans. On the night of December 15, 1900, the crew of the Archtor, a steamer bound for Leith, noticed the light on Eilean Moor was not burning. At first, it drew no concern. Storms interrupted duties, lamps faltered, and delays in trimming or refueling were common. But when the same silence was reported again on the following night, the absence was no longer routine, it became procedural. The lighthouse was new, built only a year before. Its lamp, visible for 24 miles, served as a fixed coordinate in an unpredictable sea. By the third night, the darkness over the Flannans was recorded in 2 separate ship logs. The entry was brief, no light observed, sea rough, visibility moderate, no speculation followed. These men did not record feelings. They recorded facts. The lack of light was written in the same tone used for wind speed or cargo weight, ordinary but irreversible. In Edinburgh at the Northern Lighthouse Board, such reports arrived by telegraph with hours of delay. The clerks acknowledged them mechanically, stamping each message before filing it by date. There was no urgency at first. Lighthouses sometimes went dark for maintenance, and storms often broke the signal lines between stations. The routine explanation was always preferred. Yet, as the reports multiplied, so did the small, silent revisions in the board's schedule. A relief ship, the Hesperus, was ordered to sail at first convenience, not for inspection, but verification. On December 20, the weather turned. Gale-force winds closed the harbors, grounding ships along the western coast. For nearly a week, the Flannan Light remained unseen. Maritime traffic along the Hebrides slowed, captains keeping to deeper waters. When questioned, one officer described the absence of the light as a missing heartbeat. The remark never appeared in the official correspondence. Captain Jim Harvey of the Hesperus received his orders on December 23. He was a man known for punctuality and sparse language. The directive from the board read, *, proceed to Flannan immediately after storm subsides. Investigate absence of illumination. Deliver relief and provisions. Harvey copied the text into his own log book word for word, then underlined a single phrase, absence of illumination. He made no comment, only a notation of the weather, heavy swell, low pressure, decreasing visibility. By December 25, the storm began to ease. The Hesperus left port at dawn on Christmas Day, its engine straining against a cold headwind. The men on board spoke little. Each knew that a dark lighthouse meant hazard, but few had considered what it might mean for the keepers themselves. Through binoculars, Harvey searched the horizon. The tower appeared as a pale line against the cliffs, unlit and unmoving. No signal flags were raised. No smoke from the chimney. The sea broke steadily against the rocks, but the light that should have pierced the mist was gone. He noted the sighting, structure intact, no visible activity, no light observed. At 5:45 p.m., with daylight fading, he placed his hand over the telegraph key to contact the board, then hesitated. Procedure required confirmation before transmission. He turned to his first officer and said quietly, "We'll see it ourselves." That evening he wrote his final entry of the day, proceeding to investigate absence of light, the Hesperus altered course toward the Flannan Isles. Its mission, once routine, was now recovery. On the morning of December 26, 1900, the Hesperus anchored below the steep cliffs of Eilean Moor. The waves were still heavy from the storm, forcing the crew to wait for a lull before lowering the small boat. The captain ordered relief keeper Joseph Moore to go ashore first. It was procedure. The man taking over the station would confirm its safety before the others followed. Moore rowed toward the landing alone. He carried his oilskin, a small pack of provisions, and the written order from the Northern Lighthouse Board. The landing was slick with algae and spray. Moore tied the boat to the iron ring, looked upward, and saw no movement above. The ladder and railings were intact, but the usual signs of life, rope left coiled, crates stacked under shelter, smoke from the kitchen chimney, were absent. He began to climb. There were 160 stone steps cut into the rock, leading to the plateau where the lighthouse stood. Each was wet and uneven. The sound of his boots was the only noise against the wind. At the top he crossed the path toward the lighthouse. The door stood shut, the lock unbolted. He turned the handle. It opened without resistance. Inside, the air was still, faintly metallic with the smell of oil and salt. He called out once, "Ducat. Marshal." The sound moved up the stairwell, echoed back, and died. The kitchen was clean. The table was set for a meal that had never been eaten. 2 plates contained cold meat and bread. A third plate was empty, as though waiting. A chair was slightly pulled out from the table. The clock on the wall had stopped. The fire in the grate had burned out, but not long ago. Ashes were gray, not cold black. He inspected the sleeping quarters. The beds were unmade, as if the men had risen recently. Coats hung on pegs. Boots were lined beneath them. Nothing appeared forced or overturned. The log book lay open on the desk, its last entry dated December 13. The ink was faded but legible. The final weather note read simply, "moderate wind, sea calm." In the workroom, he found the oil supply untouched and the lens mechanism intact. One of the oilskins remained hanging on the peg, a violation of protocol, as no keeper would go out during rough weather without it. The fact seemed small, but lodged sharply in his mind. Near the window, a small canary cage hung from a hook. The bird inside was alive, motionless, until Moore approached. When it chirped, the sound startled him. It was the only living thing in the entire tower. He left the cage door ajar and stepped back into the corridor. The silence pressed against him, a silence not of emptiness but interruption. He turned once more to the door, looked at the table, the clock, the chairs. It felt as though the men had been summoned away mid-task and never returned. Nothing was stolen, nothing broken, nothing moved. The scene was too perfect to belong to disaster. Moore stepped outside into the wind. His throat tightened. He began running back down the steps toward the landing, half slipping on the wet stone, his hand gripping the rail. When he reached the bottom, he shouted up toward the cliffs, though he did not know why. "They're gone," he said, and the wind carried the words upward until it seemed to answer him back. By noon, the weather had steadied enough for the Hesperus crew to join Moore ashore. Captain Harvey ordered a full inspection of the island. The men advanced methodically, moving from the lighthouse toward the western cliffs, where supply deliveries were normally made. Each carried a lantern and notebook, and the unspoken awareness that they were no longer looking for colleagues. They were looking for proof of their deaths. The ground near the tower was undisturbed. Grass flattened only by wind, no footprints beyond their own. But as they descended toward the western side, the path changed. Salt lines and dislodged stones, recent erosion, and fragments of rope dragged along the rock. Harvey noted each irregularity aloud. Moore wrote them down. The others followed, saying little. The west landing was built into a natural recess of basalt. A small railway ran from the platform to the storage hut above, used to haul supplies from the boats below. Now the rails were bent inward, twisted as if by weight or impact. One of the iron posts had snapped clean at its base. Nearby, a wooden supply box lay shattered. Its contents, ropes, pulleys, and hooks, were scattered across the rocks, tangled and whitened by sea spray. Moore crouched beside the wreckage and examined the edges. The wood had splintered outward, not inward, suggesting it had been struck from below. He found no burn marks, no signs of deliberate force. Harvey concluded that heavy waves had struck the landing, but the scale seemed wrong. The destruction was limited to one side, too selective for a single blow. A coil of rope remained attached to a rusted ring, half unwound. Its end hung over the cliff. Harvey tested the line. It fell slack into open air. No counterweight, no equipment at the bottom. The rope had not snapped. It had been released. Farther up, they found the remnants of a railing pulled from the concrete. The bolts were sheared, not loosened. Harvey recorded, severe stress at mooring points, indicative of extreme pressure from surf or object impact. He paused before writing the next line, then added, no personal effects recovered. Moore found a set of footprints leading away from the hut toward the cliff's edge. 3 pairs, partially washed out, but still distinguishable in the damp soil. One set was lighter, possibly MacArthur, the smallest of the keepers. The prints overlapped near the broken rail as though the men had gathered there. Beyond that the trail ended abruptly. He crouched close and traced the last visible impression with his finger. The indentation held a thin pool of rainwater, clear enough to reflect the gray sky. There were no drag marks, no signs of slipping or fall, just a sudden stop. The men stood in silence, scanning the sea below. Waves moved steadily against the rocks, the foam whitening and vanishing with rhythm. Nothing floated. No body, no wreckage, no torn clothing. Harvey finally spoke. They came down here together. They didn't go back. He marked the coordinates, instructed the others to gather what remained, and turned toward the slope. The canary, still faintly audible from the tower above, was the only sound breaking the wind. As they climbed back up, Moore looked once more toward the edge. The 3 sets of footprints dissolved as the next wave struck, erasing even the last print filled with rain. Robert Muirhead arrived on Eilean Moor 3 days after the Hesperus completed its search. The sea was calmer now, though the wind still moved in long, uneven breaths against the cliffs. He disembarked without ceremony and began his inspection immediately. Muirhead was not a stranger to the station. He had personally selected each of the 3 missing keepers, approved their postings, and overseen the lighthouse's final construction only a year earlier. His face betrayed nothing, but his notes began the moment his boots touched the stone. He started with the outer structure. The tower stood sound, the lantern room intact. The iron fittings on the doors showed no signs of damage. The water tanks were half full, the signal apparatus untouched. He recorded every detail in formal script, his handwriting narrow and mechanical. The wind rattled the corners of the pages. Inside the tower was, as Joseph Moore had described. The beds remained unmade. The kitchen table still laid for 3. Muirhead examined the clock on the wall, noted the time frozen at 9:10. He wound the mechanism experimentally. It began to tick again, steady, indifferent. The oil stores were adequate, the lamp mechanisms operational. Nothing suggested sabotage or neglect. He turned next to the log book resting on the desk beside a blotter and quill. The last complete entry was dated December 13. The handwriting belonged to Thomas Marshall, the second assistant keeper, legible, cautious even. Subsequent pages contained only weather notations, brief and factual. There were no personal remarks, no indications of conflict or illness. Muirhead flipped to the final page, found it blank. He underlined the date, replaced the cover, and signed the margin, examined by R. Muirhead, 29 December 1900, he examined the keeper's personal effects. Boots, tobacco tins, a few folded letters. Each man's kit was neatly arranged, consistent with regulation. The only irregularity he observed was a missing oilskin, a detail already reported by Harvey. Muirhead logged it again, though he added no interpretation. He moved room to room, checking hinges, locks, and maintenance tools. When he reached the small cabinet by the west stair, he paused. The key ring lay on top, containing 5 brass keys of varying size. He compared them with the inventory list attached to the wall. One was absent, the key to the west storeroom, a location used for ropes and ballast gear. He searched the adjacent shelves and drawers methodically, but the missing key did not appear. He documented the omission carefully, key number 5, west, not found. Remaining keys in place, his handwriting, previously exact, showed a minor tremor at the line's end. He stopped, cleaned his pen, and continued as though it had not occurred. Outside, he revisited the west landing, comparing Harvey's notes to his own observations. The damage matched the earlier report. The force required to bend the railings and dislodge the supply box exceeded normal wave conditions. Still, Muirhead resisted speculation. He measured distances, recorded weather patterns, and cited standard maintenance intervals. Every uncertainty was rendered as procedure. That evening he completed his report in the watchroom. His pages were weighted by an ink bottle to keep them from lifting in the wind. The ink spread unevenly across the damp paper. He signed the final page, folded it into an envelope, and sealed it with wax. Then from his pocket he removed one smaller page of personal notes, unnumbered, unaddressed, and placed it quietly into his case. When he returned to the landing, the sea had risen again, covering the lowest rung of the ladder. The men from the Hesperus waited without speaking. Muirhead handed the official envelope to Captain Harvey and kept the other sheet inside his coat. He said only, "The report is complete, but the missing key remains unaccounted for." In early January 1901, Superintendent Muirhead sat in his Edinburgh office, reviewing the meteorological data gathered from stations along the North Atlantic coast. The room was cold, the single coal fire insufficient against the damp. He laid each document flat upon his desk, the official weather reports from December 12 to 20, lighthouse barometer readings, and marine telegraphs from Stornoway and Cape Wrath. His intention was to confirm what nature itself had already declared, that the Flannan Isles keepers had been claimed by the sea. The data, however, resisted the conclusion. The log book from Eilean Moor recorded moderate wind and calm seas on December 13, with no further entries after the morning of the 15th. The official weather reports confirmed that the Great Gale, the so-called freak wave that tore railings from the West Landing, did not reach the Outer Hebrides until late on the 15th, intensifying through the 16th. The timeline did not fit. For the men to have died during the storm, they would have had to remain alive long enough to write nothing about it. Muirhead checked each corresponding report, tracing isobars on a chart pinned to the wall. The paper rippled slightly from the draft under the door. He followed the lines with a pencil, his movements slow, deliberate. The pressure had fallen steadily after midday on the 15th, but the log book ended hours earlier. He marked the margin, disappearance possibly before gale onset, then he underlined it twice and drew a line through it. He turned to the mechanical records, barometer readings, maintenance schedules, and lens rotation intervals. The equipment showed no fault. The oil was topped on the morning of the 15th, the wick replaced. The machinery itself had continued perfectly, as though the men had left mid-duty without mechanical cause. From the office window, Muirhead watched sleet move in slow diagonals across the glass. He noted the hour, 4:12 p.m., and returned to his papers. Every calculation he performed led to the same result. The environment could not fully account for the loss. His pen hovered over the report line labeled probable cause. He began to write accidental drowning, then paused, staring at the ink's slow spread on the page. In a separate notebook, kept unofficially, he began a private paragraph, There exists possibility of psychological collapse due to confinement and prolonged isolation. Fear, panic, or quarrel may have drawn all three to danger without external cause. The words looked inappropriate beside barometric figures. He hesitated, then turned the page and began writing the official version, a controlled account of meteorological events without mention of the men's state of mind. He studied the barometer on his own wall. The needle trembled between 2 marks, but did not move further. He imagined the same motion repeating endlessly in the lighthouse, the instrument measuring pressure long after its watchers had ceased to exist. When the report was typed the next morning, the official conclusion was concise. It is most probable that the keepers, while attending to duties on the West Landing during adverse weather, were swept away by an exceptional wave. He reviewed it twice, made one correction, and signed his name beneath. The private notebook remained open on the desk. He looked again at the sentence he had written, mental collapse under isolation *, then closed the cover firmly, placed it in the bottom drawer of his desk, and turned the key. On the inside of the notebook's margin, in faint graphite, he left one final note: disturbance, possibly pre-storm, do not publish. By the first week of January 1901, the inquiry reached its most difficult task, reconstructing the final hours of the Flannan keepers. Superintendent Muirhead and Captain Harvey met in the records office at Oban, surrounded by ship logs, meteorological charts, and telegraph transcripts. The goal was simple on paper: to align time. In practice, it proved impossible. The lighthouse log book ended on the morning of December 15. The last entry was a routine weather note: moderate wind, sea calm. After that, silence. Harvey's own log, written aboard the Hesperus, recorded the first observation of the light's absence on the night of the 15th. Between those two documents lay a gap of roughly 36 hours. No lamp signals were seen. No weather notes transmitted. No signs of distress reported. The three men had ceased to exist within that void. Muirhead placed the documents side by side. The ink on the lighthouse log had faded unevenly. Evidence of damp, not haste. He traced the time notations in the margin, comparing them to Harvey's shipboard entries. The rhythm of human activity stopped abruptly at midday on the 15th, lantern checks, meal times, watch changes, all regular until then. No signs of fatigue or panic. Then nothing. They turned next to the mechanical evidence. Moore had recovered a pocket watch from the sleeping quarters, resting beside James Duckett's bed. The casing was dented. The glass cracked but intact. When wound, it did not move. The hands were frozen at 1:20. Harvey recorded the discovery in his report, assuming the time marked the moment of impact or submersion. But there was a problem. By every available record, the storm had already passed by then. Muirhead set the watch beside the open log book. If this stopped after the wave, he said, then one of them was still alive to drop it. Harvey said nothing. The statement hung between them like a misfiled page. The clock from the lighthouse, retrieved intact, had stopped earlier at 9:10. 2 timepieces, 2 conclusions. Either the instruments had failed independently, or they recorded separate moments of loss. Muirhead refused to assign meaning to either, but he wrote both down. The men reconstructed the likely sequence. December 13th, routine maintenance. December 14th, calm sea, all duties performed. Morning of the 15th, final weather note. Between midday and dusk, the record vanished. The storm intensified after dark. By the 16th, waves reached their peak. If the keepers had been swept away during the storm, at least one of them had survived long enough to mark 1:20 on his watch, and long enough not to relight the lamp. The Hesperus arrived on the 26th, 11 days gone. The food in the kitchen had not spoiled. The fire ashes were pale, meaning it had burned within the last 3 days. Time, once measured in the strict rotation of shifts and signals, had dissolved into fragments. A stopped clock, a silent log, a frozen watch. When Muirhead finalized his reconstruction, he attached both time entries in the margin, *9:10, cessation of clock. 1:20, cessation of watch, beneath it, in smaller script, he wrote, neither marks the end of life, only the end of record. The report concluded with the official phrase, no further entries. The final page of the log book remained blank, its ruled lines waiting for words that would never be written. Robert Muirhead decided to remain overnight on Eilean Moor to complete his final inspection. The others had returned to the Hesperus, leaving him with the silence of the island and the fading daylight. The decision was procedural, one last examination of the equipment before submission of the report, but its effect was personal. By dusk the wind dropped, and the sea flattened to a slow, uneven rhythm. The isolation, which he had always treated as a professional constant, began to feel like an intrusion. He documented the final readings from the barometer and recorded the temperature, 38°, falling. Inside the tower, the air smelled faintly of oil and iron. The lamp had been extinguished since its discovery, but he lit a smaller lantern for his notes. Its flame flickered against the glass, creating an intermittent reflection on the page. The silence was total. No insects, no birds, no movement beyond the shifting of wind through the vent slats. He boiled tea on the stove and sat at the kitchen table, writing his closing statements. The sentences read cleanly, each one factual, yet his handwriting wavered as the night drew on. The chair opposite him remained empty, angled slightly from the table. He found himself adjusting it twice without reason. At intervals he noted the faint rhythmic pressure of the waves below. It was consistent enough to seem deliberate, the sound of something breathing beneath the floor. At midnight, he performed a last inspection of the lantern room. The machinery was clean, the lens free of soot, the oil reservoir filled exactly to regulation level. He wound the rotation mechanism by hand, half turn, stop, half turn again, and watched it respond precisely. No mechanical fault explained the disappearance of the light. He wrote the time beside the entry, 12:02 a.m., then he descended step by step, counting them without realizing it, matching each to the pulse of the wind outside. Back in the quarters, he found the air colder, his breath visible. The lantern flame thinned, bending with each draft through the vent. He poured the remaining tea, but did not drink it. The cup cooled beside his notebook, the liquid surface unmoving. At some point before dawn he fell asleep at the table, his pen still in hand. When he woke, the light outside was a dull gray. The room was colder still. The lantern had gone out. The wick was clean, the reservoir full, the chimney glass unbroken. He examined it methodically, recorded the details, and wrote nothing about his confusion. The official report would not contain such ambiguities. He refilled the lamp, struck a match, and the flame caught instantly, steady and bright. By mid-morning, he gathered his papers, checked each page for signature and date, and placed them into his case. Before leaving, he looked once more around the room, the clock, the chairs, the folded oilskins, and understood, without allowing it to reach his report, why the men might have walked outside into the storm. Not panic, but a need for sound. When the Hesperus' horn echoed across the water, he locked the lighthouse door, descended the steps, and did not look back. The official record would describe a thorough investigation concluded without anomaly, but Muirhead left the island with one certainty he could not verify. After a single night, he no longer trusted his senses. By the middle of the 20th century, the Flannan Isles had become a coordinate more than a place. The lighthouse stood intact, its walls repainted by successive crews, its machinery improved by engineers who no longer stayed the night. The automation program had reached the Hebrides in the late 1960s, replacing human keepers with clockwork precision and electric pulse. What had once required 3 men now required none. The sea kept its distance, and the light kept its schedule. The modernization report for Eilean Moor was filed in 1971. It described the installation of an automatic acetylene system, the removal of beds, cookware, and personal effects, and the sealing of the keeper's quarters. The work was finished in 12 days. When the technicians departed, the tower remained lit, a perfect mechanism operating in silence. No one wrote in its log book again. From the mainland, the beam appeared every 30 seconds, steady as mathematics. Fishermen noted its return, but spoke of it differently. It seemed colder, the light sharper, detached from the weather. There was no hand behind it, no fatigue, no hesitation in the interval. The lighthouse had become what the institution had always intended, a pure signal, emptied of the human condition that once faltered inside it. The families of Duckett, Marshall, and MacArthur were long gone by then. Their names existed only on pension records, and one rusted memorial plaque mounted at the base of the tower. The inscription had corroded unevenly. Each name ended in a small pool of rust, like dried blood on metal. Tourists who visited by chartered boat sometimes photographed it, but rarely lingered. There was nothing left to interpret. The air smelled of salt and iron, the same as it always had. In 1977, during a review of archival holdings, a clerk in the Northern Lighthouse Board storage office found an unmarked envelope among personnel papers. The wax seal had cracked with age. Across the front was written, "*, to be opened upon my death." * Inside were 4 handwritten pages dated 1901, signed by Robert Muirhead. The letter was read once, catalogued, and filed under personal correspondence, restricted. The board never published it. The file number was misprinted on the index card, ensuring no further access requests could locate it again. The automation logs continued without interruption. Every entry that followed was numerical. Lamp cycles, maintenance intervals, voltage fluctuations. In 1985, a new electric system replaced the gas. The engineers recorded its completion in one sentence: light operating normally. The meaning of normal had changed entirely. Today, the tower still stands on Eilean Moor, its paint dull from decades of wind. The revolving lens turns above an empty stairwell, casting light over water that no one watches. Below, the final handwritten line in the surviving log book remains visible beneath the glass of an archival case. The ink has thinned but endures. Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all. No one added a line beneath it. The entry was complete before the century began, and every light since has followed its rhythm, precise, indifferent, and without witness. If this story unsettled you, like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the Shadow Book for more true stories buried in the dark corners of history.